The wind in that valley had teeth, and it knew but one name to chew on: Alara. It was a name the granite cliffs themselves seemed to whisper in a long, mournful sigh. Her husband, Liam, had been taken by the mountain's fever 6 months prior, and with him went the thin veneer of acceptance she had been granted in the town of Silver Ledge. She was an outsider, brought in by a local son, and now that he was gone, she was just a loose thread in a tightly woven, unforgiving tapestry. The inheritance, when it was finally settled by the town's self-appointed magistrate, Master Thorne, was a cruel joke delivered with a thin, satisfied smile. He sat behind his oaken desk, a man built like a barrel and just as hollow, and pushed a brittle piece of parchment across the polished surface. It was the deed to the Whispering Maw, a silver mine that had given the town its name, and then bled it dry a generation ago. It was a collapsed, haunted, and utterly worthless hole in the ground. She had stood there in his office, the scent of beeswax and old paper filling her lungs, and felt the weight of every eye in the settlement boring into her back through the thick wooden walls. They had all known what was coming. The fertile patch of land Liam had worked, the small but sturdy cabin he had built, all of it was absorbed back into Thorne's holdings to settle imagined debts. All that remained for the widow was the maw, a tomb, a final insulting gesture from a community that had never wanted her, and now had the perfect excuse to be rid of her. "You cannot farm rock," Thorne had said, his voice a low rumble of false pity. "You cannot shelter in a collapsed shaft. Perhaps you have family back east you could impose upon." The implication was clear. Leave. Vanish. Become a ghost, like your husband, like the mine itself. Alara took the deed. Her hand did not tremble. Her face, which had become a mask of pale grief in the preceding months, remained impassive. She folded the parchment, its edges crackling like autumn leaves, and placed it in the pocket of her worn woolen dress. She said nothing. There was nothing to say that their closed hearts could hear. She walked out of Thorne's office and into the biting wind of late autumn. The sky was the color of old pewter, a heavy, oppressive lid on the valley. The peaks of the surrounding mountains were already white, a promise of the winter to come. It was a winter the town elders called a bone killer in the making. The squirrels were frantic, the river was running low and cold, and the old folks felt a deep ache that foretold a snow that would not just cover the ground, but bury it. For a week she slept in the abandoned livery, a place that smelled of hay dust and rat droppings. She had a few coins left, enough for a bit of hard bread and dried jerky, but she rationed them with a miser's care. Every day she walked the perimeter of the town, a solitary figure wrapped in a threadbare shawl. The townspeople watched her from their windows. They saw a woman unmoored, drifting toward a predictable, tragic end. They whispered. The Maw wife, some of the children began to call her, a name that started as a cruel joke and would later become a legend. They saw her walking the path that led up the scree slope to the dark, gaping mouth of the old mine, and they shook their heads. Pity and scorn were two sides of the same worthless coin they offered her. Silas the blacksmith, a man whose kindness was always at war with his pragmatism, watched her pass his forge one afternoon. He saw the set of her jaw, the distant focus in her eyes, and felt a pang of something more than pity. It was a flicker of uneasy curiosity. He knew that look. It was the look of a creature backed into a corner, one that had decided not to die, but to do something utterly unpredictable instead. Her decision was not born of madness, though it looked like it from the outside. It was born of a deeper memory, a piece of wisdom her grandfather, a geologist with hands as rough as granite and a mind as clear as quartz, had given her as a child. He had once taken her into a deep cellar on a sweltering summer day. While the world above baked under a relentless sun, the air in the cellar was cool, still, and damp. "The earth breathes," he had told her, his voice echoing slightly in the stone-lined room. It breathes out its own steady temperature, indifferent to the fevers and chills of the surface. Deep enough and winter never arrives. Deep enough and the summer sun is just a rumor. The earth remembers a time before seasons. Desperation drove her feet up the treacherous path to the whispering maw, but it was that memory that guided her hand. The entrance was a jagged wound in the mountainside, partially choked with fallen rock and the skeletal remains of old timbers. A sign weathered to near illegibility warned of unstable ground. The air that trickled from the opening was cool, but it was not the frozen, biting cold of the valley wind. It was a damp, still cold, thick with the smell of wet stone and ancient darkness. It was the earth's breath. She stood at the threshold, the wind whipping her hair around her face, and felt the two opposing currents of air. The frantic, hostile air of the world she was being cast out of, and the slow, steady exhalation of the mountain's heart. In that moment, the choice became clear. The world of men had offered her a tomb. She would instead seek sanctuary in the belly of the earth. She spent her last coins at Silas's forge. She did not ask for credit or charity. She laid the worn metal discs on his soot-stained counter and asked for a sturdy shovel, a pickaxe, and a length of good rope. Silas looked at the meager payment, then at the tools she had selected. Together they were worth 10 times what she offered. He looked into her eyes, gray and serious as a winter sea, and saw no plea. He saw only resolve. "What's this for, Ilara?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Clearing a path, she replied, her voice even. He knew which path she meant. He had heard the whispers, the cruel new name they had for her. "Woman, that's suicide. The maw has been settling for 50 years. The timbers are rotten. The shafts are flooded. It's a grave waiting for a body." "I have nowhere else," she said. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered without an ounce of self-pity. It was more powerful than any argument. Silas let out a long, heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the whole town's skepticism. He took her coins, then went to the back of his forge. He returned with the tools she'd asked for, but they were not the old, worn ones she had chosen. They were new, the hickory handles smooth and pale, the steel heads dark and oiled. He also brought a heavy-duty lantern and a can of fuel. "A gift," he grunted before she could protest. "From Liam." He was a good man. It was a lie, a kindness wrapped in a respectable falsehood, and they both knew it. He would not help her with the work. His wife and the town's judgment would never allow it. But he would not send her to her death with shoddy tools. It was the most he could do. "Thank you, Silas," she said. The words were quiet, but they landed with the weight of a hammer blow in the noisy forge. He just nodded, turning back to his anvil, unable to watch her walk away with the instruments of what he believed would be her own burial. The work was a slow, brutal conversation with the mountain. Her first days were spent just clearing the entrance. She was not a miner. Her hands, accustomed to kneading dough and tending a small garden, blistered within the first hour. The pickaxe felt alien and clumsy in her grip. The shovel was a leaden weight. She worked from the first hint of dawn until the last vestiges of light failed in the pewter sky, a solitary engine of desperate will. She learned the language of the rock, the sharp crack of fracturing granite, the soft, treacherous slide of scree, the groan of an old timber taking on weight it could no longer bear. She was not trying to conquer the mountain. She was asking for permission to enter. She cleared the fallen rock, not by attacking the pile, but by finding the keystones, the linchpins that held the chaos together, and carefully prying them loose. Slowly, painstakingly, the entrance widened. She could now stand upright just inside the mouth of the mine. The darkness within was absolute, a solid thing that seemed to push back against the gray daylight. Lighting the lantern felt like a sacred act, a tiny, defiant sun against an infinite night. The beam cut a cone of yellow light through the black, illuminating a scene of decay. The main adit, the horizontal entrance tunnel, was a corridor of collapsed timbers and rockfalls. The air was thick with the mineral tang of the earth and a profound, unnerving silence. The wind could not reach her here. The world outside, with its judgments and its coming winter, was muted. Here, the only sounds were her own breathing and the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the deep. She did not venture far at first. Her grandfather had also taught her caution. She spent a week securing the first 20 feet of the tunnel. She used the rope Silas had given her to test the integrity of the remaining upright timbers, tapping them with her pickaxe, listening to the sound they made. A solid, resonant thud was a friend. A dull, punky thunk was a warning. She found a vein of slate nearby and, with immense effort, chipped away flat, sturdy pieces, using them to shore up the walls where the original shoring had rotted away. It was agonizingly slow. Each stone set in place was a victory measured in inches. The townspeople, seeing the faint, flickering light of her lantern from the valley floor at night, confirmed their diagnosis of her madness. "She's digging her own grave," Master Thorn declared at the town hall, a pronouncement that was met with grim, nodding agreement. "Let her. It will save us the trouble of a pauper's burial." His words, as they always did, filtered back to her. A passing boy, emboldened by his friends, shouted, "Maw wife!" at her as she hauled a bucket of slate chips down the slope. The name no longer stung. It felt accurate. She was becoming a wife to this dark, silent place. She was learning its moods, its strengths, its weaknesses. She was tending to it, caring for it, and in return it was offering her a chance. The deeper she went, the more the temperature stabilized. The chill of the entrance gave way to a constant, profound coolness. It was the temperature of a root cellar, a steady 50 degrees, regardless of the world outside. While the first snows began to dust the high peaks and the valley floor frosted over each morning, her small secured section of the mine remained unchanged. One day, Master Thorn himself made the climb. He appeared at the entrance to the mine, his bulky frame blocking the light, his face a mask of contemptuous authority. "What is the meaning of this folly?" he demanded, his voice booming in the confined space. Ilara, covered in dust and grime, her hands raw, simply looked at him from the end of her lantern's beam. "I am making a home," she said. Thorn laughed, a harsh, barking sound that echoed unnaturally off the rock. "A home? This is a crypt. You are a danger to yourself and a blight on this community's good sense. I forbid you to continue this madness." "By what right?" Ilara asked, her voice quiet but unwavering. "By the right of a sane man advising a witless woman. This mountain will claim you, and I'll not have the town council responsible for scraping your remains off the rocks. Pack your things and be gone from this valley by week's end." She did not argue. She did not plead. She simply held his gaze. "The deed to this land is mine, Master Thorn. The mountain and I will come to our own terms." "You are not a part of that negotiation." His face purpled with rage. He was a man accustomed to obedience, to the cowering respect of those who depended on him. To be defied by this destitute, grief-maddened woman in the mouth of a derelict mine was an insult he could barely process. He took a step forward, as if to physically drag her out, but something in her stance, something in the absolute stillness of her gaze, gave him pause. The lantern light caught the head of the pickaxe she held loosely in one hand. It was not a threat, but it was a statement. She was no longer a helpless victim. She was a creature of this place, and he was the intruder. He spat on the ground. "Have it your way, woman. When the winter takes you, do not expect us to come looking for your frozen corpse." He turned and stormed back down the path, his anger radiating off him like heat from a furnace. The confrontation solidified her resolve. The town's scorn was no longer a passive force. It had a face and a name, and it had given her a deadline. She worked with a feverish intensity, pushing deeper into the main adit. About 40 feet in, she broke through a smaller rockfall into a chamber that changed everything. It was a side chamber, a pocket where miners had once followed a promising vein. It was about 15 feet square and remarkably stable, with a vaulted ceiling of solid granite that needed no shoring. A thin, steady trickle of water seeped from a crack in the far wall, pooling in a small basin before draining away into the rock. It was clean, cold, and pure. But the most important discovery was a narrow vertical fissure that snaked its way up through the rock. A faint, almost imperceptible current of air flowed from it. It was an air shaft, likely connecting to another level or even the surface far, far above. It was ventilation. This chamber would be her home. She spent the next 2 weeks making it habitable. She leveled the floor, built a low, dry stone wall to divert the water seep into a contained channel, and used scavenged planks from the collapsed sections to build a raised platform for her bedroll. She was meticulous. She understood that survival here was not about grand gestures, but about the intelligent management of details. She created a system. Her living chamber was the heart. The main adit was for storage. She designated a side tunnel farther in as a latrine, relying on the natural ventilation to carry any odors away. She was not just surviving, she was creating a functional subterranean homestead. As the first true storm of winter descended upon the valley, Ilara was ready. It came without warning, a thick, swirling mass of gray cloud that snagged on the peaks and then tore open. The wind howled like a starved wolf, and the snow fell not in flakes, but in a solid, blinding sheet. In Silver Ledge, the townspeople shuttered their windows and huddled by their fires. The wind found every crack in their log cabins, every gap in the chinking. Firewood, which had seemed plentiful, was now consumed at an alarming rate just to keep the killing cold at bay. The sounds of the storm were terrifying. The shriek of the wind, the groaning of roofs under a rapidly accumulating weight, the sharp crack of frozen trees surrendering to the gale. Inside the whispering maw, Ilara heard nothing. The storm was a distant rumor, a theoretical concept. The mountain absorbed the wind's fury, its deep stone silence swallowing the blizzard whole. In her chamber, the air remained a steady 50 degrees. The single flame of her lantern was a calm, unwavering star. She sat on her sleeping pallet, wrapped in her shawl, and ate a meal of dried jerky and hard bread, sipping the pure, cold water from the rock. There was no fear. There was no struggle against the elements. There was only a profound and overwhelming sense of peace. She had not conquered the winter. She had simply stepped out of its way. She had found the one place the storm could not touch. She was safe. For 3 days the blizzard raged. It was a storm that would be spoken of for generations, the Great White Death. It buried cabins up to their eaves. It felled ancient pines like saplings. It froze livestock in their barns. In the town, life became a desperate calculus of survival. Families huddled together in single rooms, burning furniture when the firewood ran out. The cold was an invasive predator, seeping through walls, crystallizing breath in the air. Master Thorn, secure in the largest, best-built house in the valley, found his authority meant nothing to the snow. The roof of his massive granary, where he hoarded the town's surplus against high prices in the spring, groaned under the impossible weight, and then, with a sound like a thunderclap, it collapsed, burying his wealth under tons of snow and splintered timbers. Silas's home was small but well built, yet even his careful craftsmanship was no match for the White Death. A section of his roof gave way on the 3rd day, and the snow began to pour into his attic. His wife and 2 small children were shivering, their faces blue with cold, their dwindling fire a pathetic defense against the Arctic invasion. Desperation gnawed at him. He thought of Ilara. He pictured her frozen in the mouth of the mine, a grim monument to her own folly. But then another image crept into his mind. The unwavering calm in her eyes, the quiet confidence with which she had spoken of her plan. Madness? Or something else? Something he, with all his practical knowledge of wood and steel, had been too blind to see. He made a decision that his wife called insanity. Wrapping himself in every layer he owned, he took a shovel and told her to keep the fire going, no matter what. He was going to the maw. The journey was a nightmare. The wind tore at him, stealing his breath. The snow was a formless, shifting landscape that hid drifts deep enough to swallow a man whole. It took him 2 hours to cover a distance that would normally take 20 minutes. He navigated by instinct, by the vague shape of the mountain against the white chaos. He nearly gave up a dozen times, the cold seeping into his bones, his hope freezing with it. But the image of his children's faces pushed him onward. He finally stumbled onto the path leading up to the mine, now just a slight depression in the endless white. The entrance was almost completely buried, a dark crescent in a sea of snow. He clawed his way to it, shouting her name, his voice snatched away by the wind. Ilara, Ilara. He expected no answer. He began to dig frantically at the entrance, his shovel striking hidden rock. He was digging for a body, he thought, a final, futile act of decency. Then a section of snow shifted from within. A figure appeared, holding a lantern. It was Ilara. She was not frozen. She was not starving. She was calm. Her cheeks had color. She looked at him, her expression not of surprise, but of a quiet, sad understanding. "Silas," she said, her voice impossibly clear in the brief lull of the wind. "You should come inside." He stumbled past her into the tunnel, out of the wind's brutal embrace. The sudden silence was as shocking as a physical blow. The air was still. It was cool, but it was a life-giving coolness compared to the deathly cold outside. He followed the lantern's glow down the shored-up tunnel and into her living chamber. He stopped and stared. He saw the neat sleeping platform, the organized stacks of her meager supplies, the channel of fresh water. He saw a small, clever stove she had fashioned from a discarded metal bucket, and some rocks, a tiny fire of dry twigs providing a small amount of radiant heat and light, the smoke drawn away by the ventilating fissure in the ceiling. He saw not a tomb, but a sanctuary, a place of impossible ingenuity and peace. She had been surviving. No, she had been living. While the rest of them, with their sturdy cabins and their conventional wisdom, were freezing to death, she was safe. He looked at her, the maw wife, the mad woman, and he saw the sanest person in the valley. "How?" he stammered, his mind struggling to reconcile the reality of this place with everything he had believed. She gestured to the rock walls around them. "The mountain doesn't fight the winter, Silas. It simply waits. It holds its own warmth. I'm just borrowing it." He finally understood. It wasn't about fighting nature. It was about listening to it. She had listened to the deep, slow wisdom of the earth, while they had all been listening to the loud, foolish bluster of men like Thorn. He stayed for an hour, warming himself, drinking the cold, clean water. Ilara gave him a small bundle of dried meat and half a loaf of her remaining bread. "Take this for your family," she said. His pride, already shattered, crumbled completely. He accepted it with a choked sound of gratitude. Before he left, he looked around the chamber one last time. "You were right," he said. "We were the fools. All of us." Her expression didn't change. She offered no words of vindication. No, "I told you so." She didn't need to. The quiet, steady warmth of the rock said it for her. "Be careful going back," was all she said. When the storm finally broke on the 5th day, the valley was a landscape of devastation. The sun shone on a world remade in white, a beautiful and terrible sight. The cost of the White Death was slowly revealed. 2 elderly people had frozen in their homes. Dozens of livestock were lost. Nearly every structure had suffered damage. Master Thorn's fortune lay ruined under his collapsed granary, a sodden, frozen mash of grain and timber. The town was broken, humbled, and freezing. Then they saw the two figures making their way down from the mountain. It was Silas, looking exhausted but alive, and with him, Ilara. The sight of her, walking calmly out of the white wilderness, sent a shockwave of disbelief through the survivors. She was supposed to be dead. She was the first ghost of the great storm. But she was solid, alive, and unharmed. The story Silas told, first to his wife, then to his neighbors, spread through the shell-shocked community faster than a fire. He described her subterranean home, her cleverness, her foresight. He described her calm while they had been panicking, her safety while they had been dying. He did not embellish. He did not have to. The simple truth was more powerful than any legend. The town's perception of Ilara shifted with the speed and force of an avalanche. The scorn and pity evaporated, replaced by a profound, grudging, and then overwhelming awe. They looked at the ruins of their own homes, at the failure of their own certainties, and then they looked at the woman who had trusted the mountain. The Maw wife was no longer an insult. It was a title. She was the woman who had wedded herself to the rock and been protected by it. Master Thorn, his wealth and authority buried under the snow, tried to rally the old scorn. He called her a witch, claiming she had used dark arts to survive. But no one listened. His words were the hollow bluster of a ruined man. They had seen the proof of his folly in his own collapsed granary. They had seen the proof of her wisdom in the simple fact that she stood before them, alive. In the weeks that followed, a slow pilgrimage began. People made their way to the Whispering Maw, not to mock, but to learn. They saw her shored-up tunnels, her water system, her ventilated chamber. They felt the constant, steady temperature and understood. She taught them what she had learned, not with arrogance, but with the quiet patience of someone who speaks for the earth itself. She showed them how to read the rock, how to find stable chambers, how to work with the mountain's natural structure instead of against it. She explained the simple, profound principle her grandfather had taught her. The surface is fickle, but the deep is constant. The valley began to heal, but it did not rebuild as it had been. It rebuilt with new knowledge. People began digging deeper cellars, reinforcing them with stone, connecting them to their homes. They began to see the earth not as something to be built upon, but as something to be partnered with. The Whispering Maw became a place of study, a model for a new kind of architecture, a new way of thinking about survival in this harsh, beautiful land. Ilara was no longer an outcast. She was a founder. She was sought out for her advice, her opinion valued above all others. She never moved back into the valley proper. The Maw was her home, and she expanded it, not for size, but for function. She found a larger cavern deeper in, and with Silas's help, created a chimney to the surface. Here, she could maintain a larger, more permanent fire. She began to experiment with growing things in the lantern light, mosses, fungi, and then in carefully prepared beds of valley soil, pale but edible vegetables that grew year-round in the earth's steady climate. Years passed. The Great White Death became a defining story, the line that divided the town's history into a before and an after. The children who had once thrown insults at Ilara now brought their own children to the mouth of the Maw to hear the story of the wise woman who had listened to the mountain. Master Thorn lived out his days as a bitter, impoverished man, a living reminder of the arrogance of the old ways. Silas became the town's most respected builder, his designs always incorporating the subterranean principles he had learned from Ilara. Their friendship, born of desperation and vindicated by the storm, was a quiet, sturdy thing, as reliable as the mountain itself. Ilara lived to be a very old woman. She never left her home in the rock. It was her sanctuary and her kingdom. Her hair turned the color of the silver they had once sought in those tunnels, and her face became a beautiful map of her quiet, resilient life. She had arrived in the valley with nothing but a name and a shroud of grief. She had been given a tomb as an inheritance, but by refusing to accept the world's valuation of her, or of the land she was given, she had transformed that tomb into a cradle. She had found life where everyone else saw only death, warmth where they saw only cold, and a profound and lasting home in the one place they had all thrown away. Long after she was gone, the story of the Maw wife endured. It became a lesson woven into the fabric of the community. It served as a reminder that the most valuable knowledge is often not the loudest, but the quietest. It is not found in the pronouncements of powerful men, but in the whispers of the earth, in the steady, patient wisdom of the deep. The world will always have its storms, its winters of cruel opinion and harsh judgment. But there is a strength to be found not in facing the wind head-on, but in having the wisdom to step aside, to seek the quiet, stable center that exists within the earth and within oneself. It is a reminder that what others discard as worthless may hold the key to survival, and that the courage to look like a fool is sometimes the only path to true wisdom. The whispering Maw, once a symbol of failure and death, became a monument to the woman who had listened to its breath, and in doing so, had taught a whole valley how to live.